invite Mr. Music. Have you got me on? You can hear me?
Yes.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. What it does teach me two things. One, you need to be careful what you write down because someone might read it. And two, if you hang around long enough, you're bound to get most of the awards that are given out. It's just kind of by default. Your name keeps coming up and they have to go. We've started today by talking about capturing CO2, and now I'm going to move to the far end of that process where we're going to talk about sticking it in the ground, sequestering it, and what do you do then? Where has all my carbon gone, and is it sticking in the same place? And really watching where you've put it to make sure that that pot doesn't boil, at least euphemistically. So we're talking about the CCS business, and kind of I want to talk a little bit about my journey to get into this business, because as you heard in the introduction, Microseismic Inc. was largely a frac monitoring company. Not necessarily by design. When we started the company, we were going to do passive seismic in almost any venture that we could imagine. And one of our very first projects that I'm going to show you the results from was from a CCS project. But we got hauled kicking and screaming and wanting to pay the mortgage into the frac monitoring business, which became like drinking from a fire hose for a while. Well, we know where that fire hose went. And so over the last couple of years, as we've had bandwidth, which is the euphemism for being not enough work, as we had bandwidth, we decided to investigate other possibilities in the industry. And we hired a marketing consultant who went out and looked at various things we could find to do, and they found the hockey stick that the previous speaker spoke of in terms of looking at all of the predictions of where the money that was going to be spent in the CCS business would go, or how much money would be spent. And indeed, it does grow up to the right, and I think probably if these same people did this curve today, it would look even bigger. Hockey stick. I can't go past hockey without welcoming a guest who's sitting in the back corner there. It's Wayne Gretzky, folks. He's attended today. Stand up, Wayne, give us a wave for all you hockey fans. That's not Wayne Gretzky. Actually, it is a guy who was partners with me in founding of 3DX 30 years ago. But I tell you, it was absolutely true that when we would walk through airports, people would stop him and ask him for his autograph. Of course, I'll let you judge, but he's a lot older now. Anyway, hockey stick, and so we thought that there might be a business, and as I looked around the world, this curve, and I know it's awfully fuzzy, isn't it? Because they took it from a small and blew it up. But what you see of those red dots are kind of the facilities that are reported by the Global Carbon Institute, the facilities that are active today. Well, it's perhaps last fall. And there's only 30 of them, and I've heard anywhere from 20 to 40 wells that are currently putting CO2 away to a maximum, the average is about 500,000 tons a year, so we're talking about 20 million tons a year being sequestered around the world against a goal set by our community of having a gigaton put away by 2030. That's a 50x change in the next 6-7 years. That's a pretty impressive hockey stick and a real business opportunity. So I was able to convince my board, and indeed other people have convinced their boards, because these are all the projects that are suddenly appearing on the table as being in planning. But no, they're still in planning. They're a long way away. Well, what about North America? Forbes did this curve back in 2019, 2020 about how this hockey stick was going to develop in North America. Same idea, same board fronting concept that there is a real business opportunity here. It grows to about $6 billion in 2027, but I know that if Forbes did it today, they'd probably put it at twice that. Well, what's driving this? And I wish I could say it was active industry spending money, putting things in the ground, but it's not there yet. It's the governments getting out in front, trying to support, trying to say, this is what we want you to do, this slide from the DOE, and we all are probably familiar with what the Infrastructure Act that was passed last August, where it raised the amount of money you could get for putting putting CO2, sequestering it in the ground from $50 a ton to $85 a ton, and that on top of some of the things that California is doing, others, all of a sudden, started to make in North America the idea of sequestering CO2 as something that was not just politically expedient, but perhaps profitable to you as an operator. And profitable to me because, and we see that the USGS then did a study and said, whoa, we've got all this land, that's all the gray, we've got all this reservoir that we can sequester CO2 in, and all of these projects started appearing. Now these projects are still mostly on the drafting board, but we're working towards a goal that's been set by the DOE that says by 2030 we want to have 65 million tons a year being put away in the United States and if we go to the 2050 goal where the world community says I want to be having 6 gigatons put away, we want to have 1 gigaton put away in the US by then. Well, where are we today? Today, there are 2 wells doing sequestration in the United States. And their annual sequestration amount is about 750,000 tons. Now, there are 79 Class 6 wells under consideration. You can see this on their webpage, how many applications have been made by the EPA. And the 2 states that have primacy that are allowed to award their own Class 6 wells, Wyoming and North Dakota, they each have 2 in Wyoming and 10 in North Dakota. One of the 2 wells that's injecting is in North Dakota. The other is the Archer Daniels Midland one in Illinois. But that's it, folks. So, the glass half empty guys would say, whoa, this is terrible. The glass half full guys, that's you guys I know, are saying, wow, what an opportunity to scale a business and to open up in North America and go after it. Right after? What a huge business opportunity to get after these numbers. Well, the part of it that interests me, the US DOE has announced $12 billion in funding to go to support this growth. And a very small piece of it, $2.5 billion, down for the carbon storage, validation, and testing. And that's where my technology comes into play. If we look at the CCUS process, we've spent the last half hour talking about the front end, the big catch. Nice name. And if we catch it and get it somewhere, and that can be a problem, getting it somewhere these days with pipeline issues, but we then have to do something with it, stick it in the ground. And when you stick it in the ground, you need to watch it carefully to make sure it goes where you want it and it stays where you want it and it doesn't do any harm in the meantime. So the DOE actually was convinced by some of the other work that we've done in detecting karsts growing to the surface and in doing frac monitoring to say that Microseismic Inc., through its subsidiary, CO2 Secure, could perhaps develop, and they funded us developing, a turnkey microseismic, passive seismic monitoring system to monitor sequestration so that it would meet all of the rules and regulations and requirements that the DOE set. And we did that. We've executed that first program and done the front-end engineering design work, and now we've received word of a pending grant to actually take the prototype that we designed and put it on a field, an active field. There are only 2 in the US right now, but put it on one of those perhaps in the US to show and demonstrate the efficacy of what we propose. And that's really what I want to talk about, that system. Now, how did we get here? Well, we were founded, go backwards. We were founded in 2020. And as I said, we wanted to do all things passive, but we got hauled into doing frac monitoring. And for a period of time, we were a dominant force in the frac monitoring business with our technology. As I said, when we got the bandwidth, as the oil business domestically particularly started to shrink, we applied that bandwidth to developing the CO2 idea, as well as doing monitoring of karst sinkholes that grow up underneath industrial facilities, giving early warning to those before there is a sinkhole that daylight And now getting into the geothermal business as fracking becomes a tool to create more efficient geothermal entities, more efficient heat exchangers. So that's all of our business, but we've been around for 20 years. We've got a great safety record, and as we approach our customers, they recognize our innovation over the last 20 years. So what do we do then? We don't do frac monitoring, we don't do passive seismic, we just listen to the earth. Passive seismic then, compared to conventional seismic, you know it. They bring these big instruments out and they thump on the top of the earth and everybody gets upset by the shaking. Well, with us, we don't do that. We just put a stethoscope on the surface of the earth. I like to say that passive seismic is to conventional as a stethoscope is to an ultrasound. We're not creating any noise to create reflections. We're just listening. And that stethoscope that we put on the surface of the earth are just passive receivers, and I'm going to show you what they look like in just a second. Honestly. But this is not something new and radical in terms of technology. We're really just doing earthquake location. Well, back in 2005 and 2006, I wasn't allowed to say that word earthquake. But we say it today and recognize it. And what this earthquake location that you're all familiar with, that people have used for 50 years to image the surface, the interior of the earth. We simply use that technology, re-engineered down to a scale that can see the near surface of the earth, the first few kilometers, to approach some of the problems that you have as an operator when you're trying to sequester CO2. What are those problems? They're kind of enumerated here. There's how big is the reservoir? Am I going to be able to contain the CO2 that I want to put away over the next 50 years? Are there active faults near this potential reservoir? Things that could cause and induce seismicity as I start to inject in them. Is the caprock maintaining its integrity? You don't want any leaks to develop in your container that are going to cause CO2 to come to the surface. How is that plume staying within the reservoir? Is it sneaking out around the edges of your caprock so that it can then leak into the water table or get shallow? All of these questions are questions that you as an operator have to identify and enumerate in your application for a Class 6 well. And you have to verify that you understand the implications of these and put forward a program to monitor your reservoir to make sure that it's compliant with all the concerns that are raised here. Well, and compliant not just at the beginning. So at the beginning, before you inject, you have to have an idea of the size of the reservoir, you have to check the local seismicity, you have to make sure that your reservoir is competent. Then while you're injecting, by the way, the bottle is a CO2 molecule in case you didn't recognize it, while you're injecting that you don't get any induced seismicity or you don't get any leaks. And then finally, and this is something people need to appreciate, even after you stop injecting, you're going to have to monitor your site for maybe 50 years. That's what your plan has to include. So our toolkit, where we approach helping you do all of this monitoring before, during, and after, is listed here. We have a tool, the tool that we developed first for frac monitoring that we re-engineered to do CCUS, called the buried array microseismic monitoring. You can see those little blue flashes are sitting at the top of the ground where there's a geophone buried down a couple hundred feet below the surface to achieve this passive seismic monitoring, which will detect any motion on faults. It will help you by early detection mitigate any seismic hazard. It will confirm, because if you don't hear any cracks developing, it will confirm that you are keeping, that your caprock is intact. And it will help you track the fluid front, both by mapping the changes in pressure as they move, but also we can augment that with DAS cables and by doing CSEM, electromagnetic measurements, to see where that CO2, that brine solution is going. And as well, we've partnered with a firm to allow us to monitor above the reservoir for any hints that CO2 is leaking from the reservoir, and we do early warning of that, so that you can go in and grab the leak. The buried and lay array, which is our centerpiece on this solution, everything else is buttoned onto it, will provide the baseline monitoring for seismicity before you spend the money to go ahead and start injecting. During injection for that 20 or 30 years, it will be monitoring continuously, 24/7, to detect any bad things going on, and then finally we can scale it back, reduce your operating costs, but stay there forever to make sure your reservoir is keeping that CO2 in place. What does a buried array look like? Here are the elements of it. We drill it in with a seismic shot rig, inexpensive drilling. Put it down about 300 feet. You can see the sondes there. Those metal containers have geophones inside of them. They're titanium. They're packed in goop, and we've had them buried in the ground at 200 or 300 feet, which is very benign, a benign environment, for 15 years without them stopping working. So we bury them in, we cement them in, and then on the top of the ground with a very small footprint, you can see it's about just a meter on the side with an antenna on the top, the radio equipment that sends the data back home for us to process. I want to show you what it would look like in a real situation. One of the places in North Dakota that we're considering deploying our prototype is here at the Milton R. Young Power Plant, where they have actually no injection going on right now, but application to inject at one well. And our buried array would kind of look like this. It's a bit idealized. Where the star is on the end of the lake is where the power plant is. So the injection well will be right there. And then we would put the buried array concentrated, concentration stations, remember 300 feet below the ground. Concentration stations close in to see the plume as it grows. And then a circle out at some distance to monitor for any kind of induced seismicity. So that if we started to see growing earthquakes, smaller in size, if we started to see that growing, they could change their injection program to mitigate the hazard. Let the CO2 percolate out into the reservoir. So, as I mentioned, this slide's just to remind me that we also, because it's very popular these days, are going to put a DAS cable in the middle of our array so that you can measure temperature and you can do VSPs to see the plume as well. And electromagnetics. Why do we want to worry about electromagnetics? Well, with the seismic, we're mapping the change in impedance, acoustic impedance in the reservoir as you put CO2 in. But an opposite, a multi-physics or an orthogonal measurement that you can make is a change in electrical impedance as you stick the CO2 in the ground. And so this is a great way to augment and provide another view on what's going on. The system itself, you can see you have all the sensors over here on the left, and they drive the data up into the cloud along with everybody else, and we bring it down. We have monitoring 24/7 with an AI-driven algorithm that recognizes when there are anomalies that we should be concerned about, and as well hands-on analysis to make sure that what the AI is telling us is both intelligent as well as artificial. And so we always have that backup with real people. And like most of these kinds of endeavors, we operate on a stoplight system. Green is what everybody wants to see. All systems are within bounds. Yellow, we've detected some anomalies, whether that's seismic anomalies or whatever anomalies that are worrying us, and so we heighten our awareness. And red means, well, you ought to lower your injection rate for a little bit because something's going on that you don't understand and you don't want to happen. Now, I just quickly at the end wanted to highlight a couple of things. One of them is about induced seismicity, because as we've dealt with the DOE, induced seismicity has been their #1 concern. And I know all of our community doesn't always understand the metrics of induced seismicity or seismic. So here on this graph you can see it stops at a magnitude 2. Magnitude is on the left. That curve stops on a magnitude 2. And most of the work that I've done in the past for microseismic monitoring has been 3 orders of magnitude smaller than that, 4 orders of magnitude smaller than that. Very small events. The USGS doesn't even report events that aren't a magnitude 2 and you don't, or greater, and you don't get damage to buildings unless you have a magnitude 4 or 5. Now that sounds like it's a long way away from what we create when we frack, and it is. But in spite of that, and not so much from the fracking, but as a byproduct of the fracking, as a byproduct of all the water water that the shales in West Texas and New Mexico produce, and our need to dispose of that water, West Texas has become the most seismically active area in the United States. Not California, not the San Andreas Fault, West Texas. And what that caused, what that resulted in, and you can see some of these events up there, they're magnitude 5 and greater. And what that's happened is you can see that that injection line, the blue line, has fallen off in the last couple of years. And that wasn't voluntary. That's the Railroad Commission putting a cap on the amount of fluid that you can inject. And that cap currently, if I've done the math right, that cap is at about 330,000 tons of CO2 a year. Is that right, Mike? Right. 330,000. So, I mentioned that because I think that the DOE is going to be worried about this kind of thing happening when we start CO2 injection. And a lot of the economics of the operators that we're dealing with are talking about 500,000 to 1 million tons a year per well. And if we start to see this happening, they're going to curtail the amount that you can put into any single well. So think about that as you're doing your economics. Can we actually see the CO2? I said we could see the plume, we could see leaking. Well, it turned out before we got drinking from the fire hose in 2004, we did a project in the Salt Creek field up in Wyoming. And they were sticking CO2 in the ground at 2,700 feet. That's the red dot at the bottom. And what you're seeing here is a time-lapse photo of the acoustic signature of CO2 going up to that flat spot there, which was the clay boundary, migrating along that clay boundary until it found a hole it could go through and then expel into the surface. And once it got to the surface, that whole figure collapsed. So what we were hearing here was the hissing of the leak in the tire, which I believe proves that microseismic can provide what I've promised. Finally, once it hisses, you've got to have something to see what's above the ground, to see in the ground, in the air, in the groundwater, and in the soil gas. That's not my expertise. But fortunately, Wayne Gretzky came along with his partners in Korea. And partnering with both him and the Korean Institute, I'm not going to try, it's their equivalent with the USGS, it's called KIGM. They have a very powerful research group over there that's interested in understanding CO2 sequestration and the escape of gas from reservoirs. And so we are actually now, and these are press releases, partnered with them to provide the part of the monitoring that the DOE requires that approaches all of these CO2 escapements up into the near surface. And with that, that's my story. It's how I got there. It's what we're doing. It's how we can help you see where your CO2 has gone and help you watch that pot, that earthquake pot, to make sure it never boils. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Dr. Duncan. Any questions? I have a question. So can you talk a little bit about the timeline in deploying some of your monitoring systems?
Sure. So a system like you saw up in North Dakota, I guess it was, right at the power plant, that had around 54 systems. It takes us about 90 days to assemble the equipment, both the geophones, which we buy overseas, have manufactured to our specs, and then the recording equipment and getting the radio gear all together. It takes us about 90 days, 3 months to get that all in place, and then probably another month to 3 months to get the installation done. During that time, we have to do the permitting, and we're usually doing the permitting during that first 3 months. So 4 to 6 months. And we're up and recording and reporting, and you can be injecting your little hearts out.
Great. Any questions? And what do you see as the biggest hurdle in deploying this?
Biggest hurdle is money. It's always money.
Always money.
And everybody, and it's understandable, everybody looks at the bottom line. But the CCS business is not a real money-rich business yet. The margins are thin. The costs of capturing the carbon in some environments, coal plants for instance, is quite high. The shipping of it, or the pipeline issues, quite high. And as we're dealing with people now, and certainly since the Infrastructure Act was put in place, there has been a lot of activity on our phone lines, talking to people about real-world projects. But what it comes to at the end of the day is, do I really want to spend that money? And it's odd, because earthquakes never happen, right? Or it's not going to happen to me. It's kind of insurance. And people don't like to spend money on insurance until something bad happens.
All right, thanks for that. Let's give Dr. Gunn